Yakalidu Ruth Miller shiiji dana anakanagashat pun kanash kahiyangat nanashi ite. Ekuk and Shugu shikaya kilanda Anchorage and Shugu yasdura. Chikinekhilikidiki. My name is Ruth Miller. I'm a Dena'ina Athabascan and Russian Jewish woman from Anchorage, Alaska. My family's village is Ekuk, which is near Non-Dalton and Lake Clark. We then went downriver to Dillingham, so I have roots in the Bristol Bay area as well. One of my many communities has to be the organizing community based predominantly in Anchorage and Fairbanks, but expanding more and more into rural Alaska. And our responses have been so dedicated and so committed, but so slow. Our responsibility, because we're full-time residents in these urban centers, and to have access to our political representatives, is to lobby them to represent the voices of those who cannot be there in person, who don't have the privilege to walk into their offices, who don't have the privilege to skip school and protest, who don't have the privilege to do this work as a lifestyle. And so my community now also includes includes youth across Alaska who are mobilizing for political change. And what's been so inspiring is to see the deeply indigenized way that we are seeking to change this state. We're not only advocating for one political party or advocating for a set of policies, we are deeply integrating indigenous norms, the norms and the expectations and the values of our indigenous societies that we know are the foundation of this land, and the first voices who should be heard in Alaska. I expect to create an Alaska that cares about Alaskans again. I expect that our state will shortly understand the downfalls and weaknesses of relying on limited fossil fuel sources and mining sources, and will be forced by hell or high water to turn towards renewable energy. I believe that this new regenerative green economy will not only bring more jobs and more sustainability to our state, but will also prioritize the health and well-being of our people by incorporating labor norms into these jobs that provide for the employees, that fund education, that can provide adequate benefits so that no one in Alaska has to live below the poverty line. But I also expect that this new green economy will care about people's health, that we will stop polluting toxins into the air, into our foods, into our stomachs, and into our bodies, into our lungs. We'll start paying attention to the damage that we are wreaking not only on our planet but on one another. I believe that we can create an Alaska that cares deeply about being a community of Alaskans that take care of one another, that are healthy, that are centered, that value the environment and our diverse communities, and will thrive into the future. A specific issue that is threatening one of my communities is the proposal of the Pebble Mine in Bristol Bay. This is a fight that has been going on for far too long. Working against Pebble Mine was my very first job when I was 15 years old and worked for United Tribes of Bristol Bay. And now as a professional and adult, I am still working against Pebble Mine. The destruction of our last great salmon fishery for the potential production of yet another destructive mine is a price that Alaskans, that Native Alaskans, will not pay. This would jeopardize not only 14,000 jobs in the commercial fishing industry, but would threaten the entire Bristol Bay watershed that feeds hundreds of thousands of people across the region. What makes it so threatening and so frustrating to do this work is that the profits that might come from a mine would go to the very, very few. Years ago, even companies began pulling out of the mining project because they could see that it would not be lucrative and would not be worth the human cost of life. And yet today our politicians are still hell-bent on extracting these resources from a region that does not want or welcome this mine. The first and most important way to mobilize change is by starting with your community, by talking to people, by building relationships. There will be no effective change that does not bring people along, and there will be no change that's welcome in Alaska that is not deeply grounded in what Alaskans want. And that means reaching out to rural. That means reaching our communities who experience the repercussions of climate change and can reap the benefits of our beautiful land day after day through subsistence lifestyles. It means talking to people, building relationships, and making sure that any change we're pursuing is in tune with the needs of our people. And in that way, you can gather so many more people to join your mobilizing effort. The second way to mobilize change is to use those stories, to use those firsthand accounts and those experiences and help uplift those voices so that voices who are not in our urban centers, voices who have historically been underrepresented and oppressed, can not only take the mic but set the stage. Using those stories is such an impactful way to speak truth to power, and by encouraging people to find their own voice and represent themselves, you are empowering our communities and enabling our people to lift themselves up.
What does living in Alaska and living with a connection or a relationship with the land and the environment mean to you?
Living in Alaska and having a relationship to the land today, to me, means that we see climate change first and foremost. I notice when I can't put fish in the freezer of my family. I notice when I have nothing to bring my grandfather after going out on a trip. It means that we notice the changing berry seasons, the changing hunting seasons, and we feel it because our livelihoods and our kitchens depend on it. It means that we are so deeply in harmony with this land that we have come to learn and come to love generation after generation, that damaging the land feels like damaging ourselves. The violations that we are causing against our lands and waters and airs in this region of the world are so devastating because they are unprecedented and because they are so in counter to the indigenous values and traditions that we believe so strongly in, that we know can pilot healthy ecosystems across the rest of the world, and that we know are powerful and pure and good because we have curated these relationships with our animal relatives and our plant relatives across so many hundreds and thousands of years. Living in Alaska and having a relationship to the land today, to me, means that we see climate change first and foremost. I notice when I can't put fish in the freezer of my family. I notice when I have nothing to bring my grandfather after going out on a trip. It means that we notice the changing berry seasons, the changing hunting seasons, and we feel it because our livelihoods and our kitchens depend on it. It means that we are so deeply in harmony with this land that we have come to learn and come to love generation after generation, that damaging the land feels like damaging ourselves. The violations that we are causing against our lands and waters and airs in this region of the world are so devastating because they are unprecedented and because they are so in counter to the indigenous values and traditions that we believe so strongly in, that we know can pilot healthy ecosystems across the rest of the world, and that we know are powerful and pure and good because we have curated these relationships with our animal relatives and our plant relatives across so many hundreds and thousands of years. In my work as an indigenous rights activist and as an environmental activist, often one and the same, what motivates me is my love of my land. Today, we are sitting on Dene'ina land. We are sitting on the land that raised me, the land that raised my mother, her grandmother, and her grandmother before. For me, I so desperately want to be able to give my children the gift and the joy of growing with this land, as well of knowing it, of being able to hunt and fish and gather and subsist here, of being able to walk in fresh woods and breathe clean air. And the course that our world is charted for today has no guarantees that we will leave anything here for our next generation in the path of destruction that industry and globalization are wreaking on this region. So for me, what motivates me is knowing that there is so much good and so much love in this world, and understanding that I cannot sit idly by and be complicit in its destruction. I think that that is at its core the most impactful action that we can take against climate change on a community level, is not only reducing carbon emissions, not only pursuing plastic bag bans, or instating climate action plans, but creating intentional communities that center compassion and a deep love and appreciation for the environment and for the natural world. And that is what we've seen here at AEA.